Association virtual press briefing on the challenge for distributed energy resources, DER, and the virtual power plant. I am Llewellyn King, a journalist and the briefing organizer. As usual, we have a panel of experts who will be questioned by a panel of reporters who cover energy. Before I introduce our panel, it is my pleasure to ask Sheila Hollis, Acting Executive Director of the USEA, to add her welcome and to tell you something about this extraordinary organization. Sheila.
Thank you so much, Llewellyn, and welcome to our panelists, of course, and our reporters as well. It's an honor to have you with us. United States Energy Association is a nonprofit, non-lobbying, nonpartisan organization, a rarity in DC, but that's what we are. And it's very interesting. It's been around for nearly 100 years, and we've worked all over the world right now. We have many of our full-time people deployed throughout the world, working with USAID and the State Department and the Department of Energy to improve the lives of everyone that we can help, particularly doing a massive amount of work in Eastern Europe right now. Let me say we have a very heavy commitment to helping the people in Ukraine and beyond, but we've been there for years. We didn't just wake up in the past few weeks and decide that that'd be an interesting thing to do. This has gone on for many years, improving the ability of the utilities and the governments there that are involved in energy to improve the lot for the people that they serve. And so thus, over the past 100 years, particularly since the fall of the wall, this has accelerated tremendously. But right now we're in Africa, we're in South America, we're in Central America, we're in Asia. And of course, we are right smack dab in the middle of Europe in a major way, and have helped the US government in making that transition, helping them make the transition to a cleaner, better, affordable, and available energy system. So that's what we do. That's where we do it. And then we also have wonderful experiences like this with Llewellyn. And if you look at our website, you see a lot of other opportunities to listen in on a variety of other, it's all free, variety of other aspects of what all we do and the programs that we put on. So with that, Llewellyn, I return it to you. It's an honor and a pleasure to join you today.
Thank you very much, Sheila. And of course, this would not take place without Sheila's support and help. I'm going to go straight to the panel, and I'm going to ask each member of the expert panel to say who they are and what their interest in DER is. Very briefly, I'll start with John Wellinghoff.
Thank you, Llewellyn. I'm the Chief Regulatory Officer for Voltus, which is a DER platform company that provides services primarily to commercial industrial customers, although we're starting to go down and work with the residential level as well to assist those customers with their behind-the-meter resources, DERs broadly, but more specifically, things like load flexibility, or they can control their loads, battery storage, which I'd talk about in detail later because that's going to be a very big category, and also distributed generation, rooftop solar, and standby generation and other generation resources that they can use to put into markets. And we help them facilitate them to put those resources into the wholesale energy markets and ultimately receive revenues from those markets to support the development of those resources, so they can in essence pay for those resources and continue to have continuing revenue streams to their businesses and homes. And also by doing that, increasing the supply in the markets so that we can drive down prices in wholesale markets overall. That's what we do.
Thank you, John. And of course, you're known to most of the audience as the very successful former chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Rudy Garza.
Well, thank you, Llewellyn, for the invitation to join you all today. My name is Rudy Garza. I'm President and CEO of CPS Energy. We'd like to consider ourselves one of the most forward-thinking utilities in the country. We've been talking about virtual power plants through our Save for Tomorrow Energy Plan, which is our energy efficiency and conservation program for 10 years. So the fact that VPP has become a trendy topic across the country is something that we've been involved in for quite some time now. We are certainly seeing a proliferation of rooftop solar, battery storage. Really, San Antonio, I think, is a microcosm for what our industry is and will be in the future. And we're proud to try to continue to be on the cutting edge of technology in our industry. So very timely topic and one that we're very interested in continuing to support here in San Antonio.
Thank you, Rudy. Dwayne Hiley.
Hey, good morning. I'm Dwayne Hiley. I serve as the CEO for Tri-State Generation and Transmission Association, which serves in 4 states. We serve 42 utility members in Nebraska, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico, collectively an area larger than the state of California, but very rural. The co-ops across this nation serve about 75% of the land mass and almost 90% of the persistent poverty communities in the country. So we have a responsibility to take care of those people who are in the remote areas that wouldn't otherwise get electrical service. Tri-State has a responsible energy plan, and we're making a very rapid energy transition. We'll be at 50% clean energy used by our members by 2025, and by the end of the decade in Colorado, we'll exceed 80% reduction in carbon emissions relative to a 2005 baseline. But a key part of that plan is distributed energy resources and the virtual power plant that we'll be developing with our members. Now, for a member-owned cooperative network, it's a little bit different than it is for a vertically integrated investor-owned utility or a vertically integrated municipal utility. In our case, we have 42 utility members that are distribution entities, Tri-State being the generation and transmission entity. And it makes it a little more challenging for us to roll out distributed energy resource programs and to aggregate those in a way. But we think we've got that sauce together where we can make it happen for our members and bring greater value by making an economy of scale as we bring those and aggregate those distributed resources together as part of our responsible energy plan to get us to those very rapid changes in our energy mix.
Thank you, Dwayne. And John Reynolds.
Sure, this is John Reynolds. I'm CEO of the Agile Fractal Grid. We have a little different perspective. We're working from the edge inward as far as the transition is concerned. The Agile Fractal Grid actually started with a request from Intel relative to the Department of Defense need to secure the defense communication network that evolved into the electrification and separation of the military bases off of the grid. We chose a path to work with the rural electric cooperatives on this because it was largely unregulated compared to some of the other areas. And so the name, the Agile Fractal Grid, actually comes from the National Rural Electric Cooperatives Association. This was Craig Miller's approach relative to using Einstein's theory of biomimicry as far as how you do things at scale, but very simply as far as what's going on. So we've done that. We've been attached to some rather larger entities. We're working with New York City relative to a number of different areas where this could be done from behind the meter, and working in conjunction with the utilities in the city and the areas. We have Los Angeles now that is part of this. We have other cities that are now becoming part of it, but we're working from the edge inward as far as what we're going on. So that's our specialty.
Thank you, John. And now, finally, Ahmed Musa.
Good morning, and thanks for the invite. My name is Ahmed Musa. I manage the Utility of the Future at PSE&G in New Jersey. I also have 2 small consulting firms that I founded. Basically, I live in the future. If you think about the 100% clean energy is the main focus that I'm working on. I live in New York, which is 100% renewable energy. I work in New Jersey, 100% clean energy. So really my goal is to kind of figure out how would the system operate, which basically relies heavily on solar, energy storage, wind, in some cases, nuclear generation. So it's a very interesting time to be in this business and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much. And it's my pleasure to introduce my colleagues on the reporters panel. Jennifer Hiller from the Wall Street Journal, Herman Trabish of Utility Dive, Ken Silverstein of Forbes, Rod Cookrow, Freelance, and Matt Chester from Energy Central. Jennifer, would you like to start us off with the first question, please?
Sure, thanks so much. I was hoping that the panel could talk a little bit about the policies that might be needed to be put in place for this, or just like hurdles to actually getting people enrolled? I know industrial customers are obviously participants in these things, but would love to hear about just sort of the process of like trying to get the word out about how this works to regular people.
John Wellinghoff, maybe you would like to start with that one.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that, Llewellyn. It's a very complex process. First of all, you have to understand that ultimately we have to figure out how people can pay for these resources. And to pay for them, we have to value them correctly. And to value them correctly, we have to have robust markets that allow them to provide those resources to those markets and receive value for what they're providing behind the meter. It's what Voltus has been working for. It's what FERC, I think, is trying to do and has tried to do for a long time. And I'll start out with saying that, you know, one of my predecessors was right, Pat Wood. Pat Wood wanted to put wholesale markets everywhere in the United States. He thought that they should be mandatory. He thought that they should be spread everywhere. And I agree with him. I think that is something that we need to do if we are going to get VPPs and we're going to get the DERs actually in a robust situation. And secondly, what Pat also suggested is that there be something called SMD, standard market design. We need a standard set of market rules everywhere so that these distributed resources and customers, a Walmart, for example, in California can operate under the same rules as a Walmart in New England in these markets, and then therefore know what the value of these distributed resources is. So, you know, from a policy standpoint, we need to do some, you know, some heavy lifting at the federal government, in my opinion. FERC attempted to do that with Order 2222 to consolidate and rationalize the structure for getting these particular resources into markets, but 2222 has a long way to go. We're seeing pushback from the RTOs. We're seeing pushback from primarily the investor-owned utilities. You know, and my friends at the co-ops and the munis, I think, have largely been very collaborative in this regard. But we're seeing the fact that these utilities, the monopoly investor owns primarily, have conflicts, and their conflicts are the fact that they are paid primarily for how much they invest. And so the more they invest, the more money they make, which is you know, contrary to opening up markets to areas where they can't invest, where they don't invest, which is behind the meter. So we need to recognize that, we need to understand that, and we need to somehow work through those conflicts so that we can put policies in place like implementing 2222 in a robust way, and also ensuring that there are markets available to these consumers everywhere that they can access so that they can be paid the value that these resources actually bring to the system.
Thank you. Anybody else like to comment?
This is Rudy. I'll just comment. I think John is you know, hit the nail on the head. Here in Texas, when we deregulated the market back in the early 2000s, there was not a high value placed on energy efficiency because the market wants to sell, you know, energy. And so they're coming back now that we're in some capacity constraints here in Texas, recognizing that energy efficiency has a role to play and that you have to value it such that, you know, that customers will take an interest and want to do what they can to monetize whatever investments they're making on their end to be able to, you know, to help with some of the capacity challenges that we're facing. So the regulatory structure of any market has to value distributed, you know, resources in a way that allows it to compete with traditional generation. And I think that's a, you know, that's a dynamic, especially with the legislature in session right now here in Texas, that our policymakers are working on.
Thank you. Herman Trabish.
Thanks, Llewellyn. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this. I have a question for John Reynolds and for Rudy Garza and Ahmed. this problem, this question of virtual power plants and DER, aggregated DER, I've had it explained to me in a way that's as simple as, hey, there's gold in them there hills. We can do this with resources, these distributed resources. And I've had it explained to me in a way that is more complicated than the mathematics of fractals. So I wonder if you folks who are all dealing with bringing these very distributed customer-owned resources often into the system, if you can explain how this works. And while we're at the wonk end of the street, could you tell me how much visibility and control and how much expenditures on visibility and control utilities need? And finally, is there a business model, John Reynolds, for aggregators of DERs to participate?
Okay, well, I guess I'll start since you're focused on our favorite topic here. One of the situations that you have relative to decentralizing what's going on with the DERs and the virtual power plants is where's the money coming from to actually do this? Because it's largely a private arrangement when you start working behind the meter as far as what's going on. We've been discovered by the insurance industry, which for those of you who follow that aspect of this, is about $1.6 trillion in cash and liquidity available in the world through the insurance industries and the pension funds to support critical infrastructure types of arrangements. And so we're working with that. The good news is there's plenty of money to do what has to be done if you have a worthy project to do. The bad news is you have to pay it all back. This is not a gift from the government as far as what's going to happen. So the winning formula seems to be to do something for your own properties as far as what's going on, which generates your own power, but to generate more power than you can actually use and have the convenience of being able to let the utilities use that power as they so want to relative to balancing the grid as far as what's going on. And then that causes the revenues that pays off all the debts. A lot of places can pay off the debt in about 12 years, even though it's 30-year notes as far as what's going on. So it's a very fine arrangement. But as John was saying, it all depends on finding the revenues as far as what's going on. You also need to find something big enough to be able to create enough power so it's actually worthy for the utilities, because the utilities need to be your partner. I mean, they are the person, their groups are going to be the brains that knows when to dispatch and that sort of thing. But it's very much a partnership between the two. That's what's needed.
Rudy?
Yes, sir. What I would add to that is, in a municipal environment, our customers ultimately, bear the cost of whatever programs we put out there to solve these issues. In San Antonio, our customers pay about $3.50 a month on the residential side for our energy efficiency demand response programs, and we get roughly 250 megawatts a year during peak for that value. And so my message to our customers is the cheapest form of power is the megawatt or the kilowatt hour that you don't use. And we've run the numbers. It costs us about half to run our energy efficiency and demand response programs as it does to buy or produce power, that we need for our customers. So it's not going to get the whole 5,000 megawatts that it takes to serve my customers, but it allows us a little bit of flexibility to hit a button and need a little bit less than what we would need otherwise. And there's a value for that. And so our business case, again, we've been doing this now for about 12 years. Our customers, for the most part, understand the value proposition and they're willing to pay for it. And so as long as you're making the business case on the cost benefit, most customers, I think, understand that there's a role to play for energy efficiency in the market.
Ken Silverstein.
Hi, Llewellyn. Thank you, everyone, for participating. I'm going to read this question because it involves some numbers. Guidehouse Insights says that virtual power plants may soon play a starring role. By 2030, decentralized generation will total 500,000 megawatts of capacity, while centralized generation will total about 280,000 megawatts. That's from my friend Peter Asif, who's now with a different firm. So with that as context, what is the future of virtual power plants?
Maybe Ahmed, you would
Yeah,
like
sure.
to take that.
I mean, it's a great question, and just to link it to the previous question. So if you take a step back, as let's say a large utility, maybe your load is 10,000 megawatt. That's like 10 nuclear plants, for example, or 10 large power plants. In the future, instead of relying on 10 units, it's maybe 10,000 units. So I think that's kind of the first kind of transition from a utility perspective. But the good news is, a lot of us have been, through this journey. I always say in the beginning, in the 60s, it was all about reliability. Then the 2003 blackout happened, then the focus was transmission. Then fast forward, at least in the East Coast, Superstorm Sandy destroyed the East Coast, so it became resiliency. So there's a lot of lesson learned across. And then I would say the last couple of years, renewables, cybersecurity, and ESG, right, from an environment perspective. So I think when you put all the stuff together, putting stuff, and I think there was from a long time ago that line, behind the meter, it was kind of a taboo. I mean, the front of the meter, I don't talk about behind and so forth, but this line is like very thin now. And basically, as far as at the end of the day, I worked for planning for like 18 years. We plan for the worst day, for the worst hour, for it's a very dark view of life, but you want to make sure the system is available. So what's happening now is, with the advancement of technology and the wireless meters and all the digitalization that utility have been installing. And I think also to Rudy's point, energy efficiency, we do see the value, right? Because we have a forecast and you see kind of the drop, whether it's a permanent efficiency as a demand side management, or if it's a demand response, seeing is believing, right? We're able to quantify exactly on a per circuit or per substation or the whole system, how much, load we're able to reduce when needed. I think to touch on renewables a little bit, at least in New Jersey, we used to be number 2 in the country for solar, which is very interesting because, we are the garden state, trees everywhere. It's not that much space for solar. In the East Coast, the weather is not really very cooperative, I would say, for solar. But I think really in a very high level, the commissioners, I got to give them credit for the state. There were a lot of incentives. If you've been to, at least almost every utility now, you see solar on the poles, pole top solar, you see on the parking deck. So we already have a lot of the customers that basically did the first step. And I go back to the first point that John mentioned. I think FERC Order 2222, in my opinion, again, it's not that easy at all to implement, but this is going to be the real game changer. I don't think we're going to wait till 2030 for this, because if the program is built right, which I'm sure it will be, and the incentive is right, as a homeowner, that's another incentive to go for. Not just solar, I have a behind the meter storage. I also have my electric car, and my system is very efficient. So when you put it all together, it's going to be, in my opinion, it's going to be, so again, it's all behind the meter. So from a utility perspective, right now we're addressing like cybersecurity challenges, right? You don't want to be connected to like 10 different units per customer. So we are trying to define what will be the best way to secure. But again, I think it's going to be much sooner than 2030. Customers already, have become very educated. And if you add that last piece I mentioned, which is the environmental piece, and hold the carbon offset, that really helped all of us to be on the same page. So 2222, I think, is the one basket that I would say would solve a lot of the issues we have right now. It's not easy at all to implement, but once we start implementing it, you'll see a lot of progress.
While you have the floor, Ahmed, could I just ask you to define, because we have a question come in from a viewer, what is a virtual power plant? Kumar Gupta has asked that question.
Sure. So I'll tell you from my own opinion, and I'm sure the others have a better explanation. Kind of going back to the example I gave of utilities relying on very large power plants. We know where they are. We have communication with them. We could easily see the output of 10 units. Now, instead of 10, make it 100,000. So now, instead of having, a very large solar farm at one location, now multiple customers, they either have it physically on the roof or they subscribe. I live in an apartment in New York City. I don't have the ability to put solar. So maybe I basically join VPP to build solar elsewhere. So that's like a solar perspective. The energy storage, small scale, large scale, and you kind of get the point. So virtually, they're not physically in one location, they are across different spaces. But as long as there's a robust communication and the utilities are able to see kind of the output, we don't have to telemetry to every point. But I'm sure there's a lot of common practices and best practices. But very simply, it's a large generation that's installed across multiple locations. And when you add them all up, when you aggregate them all up, they come to a certain like grid power and reactive power generation. And there's a lot more power, a lot more programs to be implemented. And I'm sure the experts will have their.
Thank you. Dwayne, you wanted to say something?
Well, I was just going to add, as we think about this transition we're all making, and some of it will be central station, solar and wind, some of it will be aggregated. We still see significant economies of scale in building projects at utility scale, but we know our members and our customers are going to be building a lot of small distributed resources. And as we look to the future, we're going to get to a point by the end of this decade, at least in our region, where we'll be running the system on majority of renewables, majority of the time. And the fossil generation that we've depended on in the past to balance the grid won't always be playing that role. Now, this is the key, and I think I heard a request earlier to get a little wonky. We have to do load balancing in real time against the energy consumption, and that's instantaneous balancing. That means some generator has to be able to move. Under the traditional purchase power agreement model, where you're buying power from a developer, they're getting paid to make kilowatt hours. They don't want to not make kilowatt hours. And so load control signal has been carried on fossil fueled units. As those units aren't there, we need something that can balance the grid, that can respond not only to increasing generation, but decreasing. And one of the things we're watching is the possibility of putting that load control signal on the renewables. The cheapest place to put it, actually. You don't have any wear and tear on the turbines of rolling them up and down. But the policy model we've constructed in this country, where we have, especially for nonprofit municipals and cooperatives, based on purchase power agreements, because you have to monetize a tax credit through a third party, has put an impediment to putting that load control signal on those units. You can't turn them down because the developer wants to sell kilowatt hours. Now, in the Inflation Reduction Act, we did get language that allows direct pay tax credits for those nonprofits, municipals, and cooperatives. And as we develop those resources, we envision having that load control signal on to be able to decommit solar, and we'll have more than we need in the afternoon. So good sunny mild days like this, we would have excess amount, and by the end of this decade we will have excess. And storage isn't always the answer. Sometimes it's put that load control signal on there and reduce the generation in real time. So we'll need that communication network to do that.
Thank you. Rod Cocro, please.
Oh, good morning, and thank you, Llewellyn, for inviting me to be part of this event. In 2019, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory put out a rather comprehensive report on the interconnection challenges to DER resources. And one of their conclusions was that there was no established sort of industry-wide best practice on how to actually forecast the deployment of distributed energy resources, whether it's renewables or batteries or even diesel generators. And they cited that as a major challenge to the owners of both the bulk power system and the distribution networks. And that their conclusion was that had to be resolved before DERs could be fully participate in the market. That may not be true across the country, but I'm just thinking to myself right now, after listening to Rudy and Dwayne in particular, I mean, do you know, for example, today exactly what your cohort of renewable or DER resources are, and can you say with any certainty that in the next 6 or 12 or 24 months you'll be adding X amount of DERs and you'll know exactly where they are? Or is the NREL conclusion that there's no industry standard to sort of gauge that deployment? Is that still the case?
I'll lean more to the latter, that it's largely out of our control. Our members, our customers at the end of the line have an incentive based on their utility bill to reduce their bill by installing distributed generation. And that incentive isn't going away. Now, in some cases, as an industry, we're sending the wrong price signal. We may be sending a price signal that has a lot of costs bundled into it that aren't really variable costs, so aren't really going to be savings. And in a lot of instances, you're seeing utilities go to a higher minimum bill that more properly reflects the cost of interconnecting to the grid. And with an energy charge, it's more closely related to the variable energy charge, which might help.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would add to that. We know that we've got 300 megawatts, give or take, of distributed energy resources in San Antonio right now. We know individually that, you know, they're placed in locations where they're not going to cause issues on our distribution, you know, grid. But if that became 3,000 megawatts, obviously we'd be in a much different situation. So we're actually working with some technology partners to figure out how to model the distribution planning work that we have to do to really create that future energy bank that will exist as market signals are being sent, as rates are developed, that monetize distributed resources in a way that looks like a central station. Then we'll have to get more sophisticated, and we're working in that direction. But computer systems will have to be upgraded. Our operation centers will look much different because we'll need screens that will show us where the solar is, where the batteries are, where the demand response is, so that, because the whole key to all of this working the way efficiently, the way markets should work, is when price signals are sent that create the value for those resources, we have to be able to see them and to know that they're going to respond, because that allows us to manage the risk associated with these resources on our network, and you monetize them in the same way we would monetize a power plant today. That was going to require a true partnership. That's going to require our distribution network being able to handle the puts and the takes in the way that is going to be necessary to operate them as a power plant. And so there's a lot of work to do, but step one is knowing where they are. Step two is knowing that our distribution networks can handle that power if they're sending it back onto the grid versus taking it as a load. And so I agree with Dwayne. I would lean towards the latter, but we're working really hard to get to a point where it's all possible. It's a matter of embracing the reality of the future, knowing that there's nothing we can do to keep our customers from going down this road. If that's what they're interested in, we got to stay relevant by making it work.
Yeah, and if I may add just to the question that you're asked, so for us, I think a lot of utilities are actually working. There's a lot of cooperation. You may not be aware of it, but we all work together, best practice. But what's really interesting, and that point was mentioned, is now we have to be very educated on the weather. That's something we didn't really study in school. So I used to be an operator myself. You operate. You don't look at the sun. You worry about storms and heat waves. But for now, like today, I'm looking. It's very cloudy in New York City. But for example, when we do benchmarking with Arizona and California, it's we're talking two different languages. The East Coast weather has a lot of challenges that the West Coast may not have, which impact how the solar performs during the peak day. And we look at a lot of data. It's very humid, and that's why I think energy storage will really step in. But I think just very quickly, you could either look at this as an asset or a liability. And if we choose to look at it as an asset, right now all the renewables, they come with the smart inverter. The sky's the limit to the capabilities of this. So I don't take much time, but really right now we are relying more often on the resources. But of course, having the telemetry, having the data, which sometimes may be expensive, but you can't fly blind, because you have to maintain the reliability of the grid at the end of the day.
Well, and let me just add one thing to that. I think this issue of the interconnection of DERs really is an issue of communication. And I think we need to, if we're going to make this work, get away from the utility and the utility meter being the gatekeeper of the communication to the grid, both to the distribution utility that certainly needs the information with respect to reliability on the distribution level, and also at the wholesale market level to have market settlements and ensure those settlements are done properly. But we are going to have to get away from looking at utility meters as being the only way to get information from distributed resources. There are devices that are available that are very inexpensive. Consumers can utilize them to ultimately have this information come up through their own internet. For example, I've got a device in my house that samples my voltage at 30 megahertz. That's 30 million times a second. Ultimately, that basically can determine whether there's faults in my wiring in my house, and at the same time actually looks outside the house to see the utility distribution system around my house to determine its health, and that information all goes up through the internet. So ultimately, we need to ensure that the internet can be used effectively. And again, we don't have to rely on the utility meter being the only source of this interconnection communication interface between the outer grid and the other side of the meter, in essence, of where the customers' resources lie and where those resources operate.
Thank you very much. Matt Chester.
Thank you, Llewellyn. We heard earlier from John about, the importance of, the cost and affordability of these resources. And it seems like much of the shift towards DERs and VPPs, they hinge on the adoption of technologies like energy storage, solar, maybe even smart technologies, smart EV charging. But those, by and large, aren't necessarily affordable to a wide pool of the country. So I'm curious if there's an equity and accessibility conversation that needs to be happening in that regard. And are there examples of those principles being integrated successfully into some of these early projects and pilots?
Yes. Oh, I can go ahead and start on that. Was that question for me? My apology for jumping right in.
Go ahead, Dwayne, go ahead.
Well, I just immediately, my thought went to this, the project we're working on right now. That's a front burner project for us, which is on-bill financing. And we have application in for $75 million of USDA funds that will go in at zero interest to be relent to our members, to their members, to let them install energy efficiency projects. And this on-bill financing is an amazing tool for us in this regard, because for a consumer, most of them don't have the capital to go upgrade their HVAC systems, and they got a lot of other things they'd spend their money on first. They get a new car or something first. But if they can put that on their utility bill and pay for the investment with the savings in their bill, and still have some money left over as savings, then that comes out positive. And it especially works in situations like imagine a rental apartment building where the individual tenants are paying the electric bill and they all have meters, but there's no incentive for the apartment building owner to upgrade the HVAC system and make it more efficient, because that's a lot of investment that he's not going to recover. So by having on-bill financing available, then the utility can pay to upgrade that system. The individual meters of the tenants the bill goes on there to pay back that investment. The apartment building owner gets a more efficient apartment building. The tenants all get lower energy bills, and they're paying for the system in the savings of the bills. It all works.
Thank you. Jennifer Hiller.
Yeah, I was wondering the extent to which you guys have data on participation. And one thing that I'm always hearing from companies is that they may have, kind of an interesting view of like the number of potential resources that are out there in people's homes, but then that like participation and enrollment is like incredibly small. I'm wondering if you could talk about like how much is potentially untapped that's out there. And I know a lot of people sort of would argue that these resources are like very kind of already overlooked and underestimated. But I'm wondering like what kind of data you have to be able to tell what exists out there and what's actually enrolled in something.
Well, I guess I'll start with that, with just some quick stats. We've got 23,000 homes, give or take, with rooftop solar in San Antonio. We've got, I don't know, 1 million residential customers, give or take. So it's a very small percentage of adoption. And a lot of our community is low, moderate income. So what we found is that we have a lot of housing stock whose roofs just aren't capable of participating in a rooftop solar program, for instance. So we've gotten push from our policymakers here locally that we've got to do more community solar so that buy down the cost of that, so somebody who is in a low income situation can still participate in some way from an equity lens. To get more participation, we're just going to have to do it in a community solar capacity. On the EV side, I will tell you that our adoption's probably been pretty slow here in San Antonio. I mean, it's growing rapidly, but it's still a very small percentage of our overall customers. And so, so I think there is going to be a role for CPS Energy to play in particular to ensure that as the private sector, installs charging stations around the community, that we're paying attention to the gaps, especially in the low income community, so that doesn't become an equity issue in terms of adoption. So I think the numbers overall, and we've got all kinds of data that we can share. If you go out to our website and you go look up our energy efficiency and demand response program, there's reports out there that that will tell you, what the market looks like. But we've got a lot of opportunity, across all sectors of our DER programs and energy efficiency and demand response programs, to continue to try to find those pockets that we're not reaching, and bring them in. Dwayne mentioned it a little while ago. We previously had not incentivized multifamily, which we are now incentivizing to ensure that customers who are paying the bill can actually gain the benefits of energy efficiency by lowering those bills. And we're doing more for low moderate income across the board, probably, than we're doing for anybody else. So I think there's a lot of opportunity ahead of us, but you have to constantly, as an operator, we are trying to constantly figure out what parts of the market we're not reaching and develop programs specifically to go after those, because that's the only way you're going to get really comprehensive access to the opportunity that energy efficiency and demand response brings.
And
Thank you
let me
very
add a
much,
little bit
Rudy.
to that, if I could, Llewellyn.
Sure.
Jennifer, give you another statistic and sort of add to the statistic that Ken threw out. It is estimated that by 2030, there will be 28 million EVs in the United States. Those 28 million EVs will have more capacity in them than all of the power plants currently in the United States. So you see the potential there, the potential to provide those resources to, in essence, provide services to the grid. But you ask about participation rates and data on that. I'd say the participation rates are very low because right now we are not providing the full value of those resources to consumers. And again, to another statistic that I can give you, when I was at FERC back in 2010, we did a demonstration of using an EV, and we actually plugged it in and via the internet, we utilized it as a regulation resource for the PJM grid. And we demonstrated in real time that, in fact, it could provide regulation service at the same time it was charging simultaneously. And we also demonstrated that by doing that, that car should have been paid and could have been paid for regulation service $5 to $7 per day. If you can give that kind of value to a consumer, you will have very high participation rates, but you have to do it very transparently. It has to be very easy for the consumer to be able to interface that market and to be able to be part of that market. And that's why you need competitive providers to aggregate these customers, to get them into the wholesale markets, to ultimately unlock that value. If you don't unlock that value in that way, you will not have high participation rates.
Herman.
Thanks, Llewellyn. John, this question is for Chair Wellinghoff, and I'd also like to get Ahmed's input because he sees the future. John, when you were at FERC, you were a great advocate for transmission, bulk transmission, almost national transmission with your regional initiatives. And you famously made MISO an offer they couldn't refuse. We still have a lot of trouble with transmission development. Maybe if the rumors are true about Judy Chang being nominated as the next FERC commissioner, she'll get it straightened out because we know she knows all about cost allocation and transmission planning. But my question is this: how much we're talking about probabilities of adoption? How much can VPPs and distributed resources provide for the system? How much can they be a non-transmission solution as we continue to struggle with siting and these other queue management issues? I had somebody at a major utility the other day tell me they thought maybe it could be 25%, but that's still not enough. Of course, we still have to solve our transmission problems. But the question is, what do you think is possible for this virtual power plants and aggregated DERs? And I'd like to get the utility perspective from Ahmed after you get done.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, Herman. Thank you for it. And I think VPPs are a partial solution, absolutely, as you suggest, to certainly our local transmission issues with respect to local upgrades, where those upgrades can in fact be enhanced or in fact completely substituted for by aggregations of behind the meter resources. And actually I did a study with the Energy Foundation before I was with Voltus that supported this. We did some work with a number of RTOs, ISOs to demonstrate that in fact you could use distributed resources in an aggregation like a VPP to be a substitute for local transmission upgrades, but you still need the long high voltage regional transmission lines that need to deliver large amounts of renewables to load centers. We still need to do much more transmission work in this country, and I'd be the first one to support that as well. But I think, I don't know if the 25% number is an accurate number, but I think it's probably somewhere between 15 and 25% where local resources can substitute for local transmission upgrades if placed correctly into the system.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if I may add, it's definitely a great question. I think that the beauty of the transmission system is the strength and the capacity and the very high rating, right? You put a transmission line of 500 kV, that's thousands of megawatts compared to distribution. I mean, right now, because we are planning for the future, we're definitely looking to others who are ahead of us. I mean, in Europe, they got a very extensive transmission station, not within cities, but within countries. Right now, I mean, there was just a project yesterday connecting like Africa to Europe. So people are realizing that it's time to make use of the available renewables, right? Solar, maybe cheap land. I mean, one point we haven't discussed here is the real estate, right? Yes, it's good to have all this very large entities, but developers, when they build in the middle of nowhere, they may save on the cost of the property, but to bring this power back, that may even be very, very difficult, sometimes almost impossible. So I think just very quickly to your point, I think transmission is needed to bring in, clean and renewable energy, whether it's hydro, nuclear, solar. There's a question about storage. I'll give you something in the next couple of years, right? As more states electrify their heating system, the heat, usually the winter peak in many places occurs at 7 a.m. The sun is not even up yet, right? So that means all you have in the future is some kind of maybe wind and solar, wind and storage. So you kind of see the point, but, excess transmission ties could really help. If there's a continuity or multiple continuities, with Mother Nature now, every day, we're seeing volcanoes, earthquake, we're seeing everything. So I think the beauty of the transmission and the power of the transmission line, especially against like Mother Nature, would definitely help. So I think just in summary, in the future, I would say everything is welcome. I know the Department of Energy is very big on energy security. That's something we're looking at as well, as we maintain the stability of the system for those who work in system operation. That's probably one of the biggest challenges in the future. And as John just mentioned, kind of like, the example of the electric vehicle kind of participating. This is great. So you have help from the distribution, which is FERC 2222, help from transmission. That way, I guess they all work together to maintain a reliable system. And this is just every day. The beauty of this is day in, day out. It's not like once in a year now. Every day is going to be a challenge for us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ken Silverstein or his dog?
You're not disturbing everyone. The context of this question is I interviewed the CEO of Voltus after Hurricane Ida struck New Orleans, which was on the exact same day, X number of years later after Katrina had struck. And the transmission had failed, and therefore the city lost its power. And so what we spoke about was the virtue of virtual power plants in this particular example, how it might have kept the lights on in New Orleans. So this may be a question for Chairman Wellinghall or for anyone who wants to answer. anyhow, I'm going to read it if I may. While virtual power plants and microgrids make use of the local distribution system, they avoid the long distance transmission lines, okay? Thereby avoiding that problem. However, a storm could down the distribution lines and impact delivery. So my question is, how would virtual power plants or distributed assets replace or work in that situation if the distribution line goes down? I mean, if a hurricane can knock out a transmission line, it can also knock out a distribution line that the microgrid depends on to deliver its power as part of the virtual power plant. So how then would it work in that situation, if possible?
Ken, that's a great question. And I think the context of the New Orleans situation, I do remember it wasn't a number of transmission lines that were actually knocked down, but talking about distribution lines being damaged and how, you know, you can have resiliency with local distributed resources, virtual power plants and microgrids. You can look at the situation of the fires in California, and that's exactly what PG&E is doing. You know, you have local lines that can be taken down by those fires, but you can still have pockets where, you know, lines are available to critical areas, to fire stations, to other areas where people can, you know, congregate and have power available to them through those distributed resources that wouldn't be available to them otherwise. So certainly, you know, to the extent if you don't have a line from A to B, you can't get any power from A to B. There's no question if a distribution and or transmission line goes down and you're trying to get power between those 2 points and the line's down, it's not going to, you know, magically jump there. But certainly to the extent you have more distributed resources, you have more opportunities and less single contingencies. And the issue is, you know, in the power business, reducing the amount of single contingencies you have to provide for the possibility of outages to people. And the more distributed resources that there are, the more opportunities people will have to have power available to them.
Here we have an example. Yeah.
John Reynolds?
Yeah, just a quick point relative to the question, relative to the hurricanes in New Orleans and that sort of thing. I just wanted to call everybody's attention to the fact that you can solve this problem, and the distribution arrangement is very important. Sometimes it has to be a greenfield environment to do this, but I don't know how many of you caught the episode on 60 Minutes the other night after the big hurricane in Florida that came through and wiped out Sanibel Island, a large part of Fort Myers and that sort of thing. And the point of that was the interview with a new city that's being created down there called Babcock Ranch. It's going to be about the size of Philadelphia in terms of the square miles as far as what's going on. It's going to be probably the most environmentally perfect city that's been built here in the United States in the last decade. But they withstood the 150-mile-an-hour winds with everybody else, and they were being interviewed like the week after the hurricane, and you look around and there was no damage. There was about a few shingles off of one house. There's about 3 trees that were blown over. But the 440 acres of the solar arrangements that run everything as far as the electric power there, the internet service never blinked, the lights never blinked, nothing happened that was wrong. Within 24 hours, they had all the damage corrected and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of people talking about that as a great example. Now, I have some familiarity with it because I participated in the development of the integrated infrastructure for that whole new city out there. But you can build this resiliency into the infrastructure. And so I'd just call everybody's attention back to that quick video. Take you 5 minutes, and that'll give you a good example of how it works when it works well.
Thank you.
I might add one example, Llewellyn. We have a mountain community called Red Feather Lakes. It was served by a long single circuit transmission line and had frequent outages, and especially in severe winter storms. And the folks in that mountain community then were stranded. And now there's a microgrid there with a solar panel and a battery and a propane backup generator in case the outage lasts longer than the battery can stand. And now we didn't have to build a second line over the mountains and all the environmental problems that would create. So it saved tens of millions of dollars of building a line, and it provides this secure electricity, just like the Florida community you just heard about. So it's real and it works. And in certain instances, it saves a lot of money.
Thank you. Next question, Manchester.
Thanks, Llewellyn. We heard a little bit earlier some talk of and mentions of cybersecurity, and so I kind of want to hone in on that. Obviously, we all know that the security of the grid has been more in the focus in the past year, both in terms of physical and cybersecurity. And so when we're talking about virtual power plants, we're presented with kind of more access points to the grid where potential vulnerabilities can be exploited, more potential weakest links for bad actors to attack. So I'm curious if any of our experts can talk about, what is the sector doing to ensure that as VPPs and DERs become more common, that the security needs of the grid are remaining, 2 steps ahead of those emerging risks.
I can start. So basically, we are working with a lot of groups like, SEPA, NIST from the government and others. We're doing the benchmarking. And I think going back to the first point, if you look at a house, right? So a house in the future will be, there's 2 parts. There's the energy efficiency part, like reducing your load, and there's the generation, like solar, storage, and EV. So right now, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find, I believe the NERC actually had a very recent, a great paper about the same kind of intention is, can we have like a one-size-fit-all standard? Right now, there's so many standards. So what we're looking for is some kind of guide. I always imagine like a black box that you put in a home, and that's kind of, like a firewall, if you will. From FERC Order 2222, right now, what has not been fully defined yet is, are we the utility physically communicating, let's say, to Matt's house, or are we talking to the aggregator and he or she then will connect? So we're trying to make sure that at the end of the day, the control centers is like not even 0.5% chance of any kind of attack. So how are we doing it in the interim? We have, for example, existing cybersecurity for the AMI meters. There's others for solar. So there's like different solutions here and there. We're trying to see, inclusively, is there like a one solution fit all? And then the last point I'll mention, a lot of utilities are investing in the management system, like DERMS, which is Distributed Energy Resources Management System. We have one too. Right now, we are working with our vendor to see if basically their solution is basically cyber resilient enough that we would work through that system to communicate to behind the meter. So there's not, I would say there's not an answer right now, but to your point, especially ever since the war in Ukraine, this is no joke right now for us. So we're working very closely with the team. But again, just not to sound like a broken record, FERC 2222 puts every single thing to the test, including this.
Might add, the electric sector, I serve as co-chair of Electric Subsector Coordinating Council. It's a public-private partnership between utility CEOs and the highest levels of our federal government, cabinet secretary level at DHS, DOE. And we work together to ensure that cyber integrity of the grid. We have an information sharing and analysis center where we have folks that have security clearance that can talk directly to our government counterparts about confidential classified threats to the grid and anticipate those and correct for those before they happen. So we do have a very robust program with mandatory enforceable cyber standards that are enforceable by NERC in the utility system. So we're doing everything we know to do and working very closely with our federal partners to do it.
Thank you. I'd like to.
Can I make a quick point here, Llewellyn, on this? I think cybersecurity is very important at the aggregated level, at the grid level, where the grid operators, distribution or high voltage transmission operators are operating the grid. We need to have very, very high levels of cybersecurity there. But this issue of multiple points at the distribution system, down at that level, I don't think it's that important. Number one, because ultimately, if you hack one house, you have 1 million more that ultimately are, providing information and they're not being hacked. So because it is distributed, because there's multiple points of provision of services, I think it lessens the importance, number one. And number two, we have this problem fairly well solved at the home level or at the distribution level. We do online banking, don't we? We do lots of things that need high levels of security, and that security ultimately is there. So yes, we do need it. at the distribution level where it's aggregated, at the transmission level where it's aggregated. I think they're doing a good job. I used to be on the ISAC group that Dwayne talked about, and ultimately that's important. But I think it's a little bit overblown about the problems that are increasing because we have all these distributed points of providing services. I don't think it's as large a problem as people think it is.
Thank you. Jennifer, you have to leave us. Thank you so much for having been along. I got a question before we went on air from Teresa Pugh of Pugh Consulting, and that was about cost. Where will the costs be? Or who will pick up the cost of DER and virtual power plants? Anybody like to tackle that?
Well, I'll go back to the comment I made. Customers ultimately pick up the cost for, what it takes to run the system. And so you have to understand and be transparent about, what, this new technology is going to add, to the overall cost structure. But again, I think as long as you're committed to transparency, most customers want innovation, at least customers that I talk to on a regular basis. They want flexibility in what they can do, whereas the meter becomes less and less relevant outside of, whatever it takes to fundamentally, recover costs for our system, but it's less of a demarcation point maybe than it's ever been before. So again, they rely on us to figure out, how all this is going to come together and keep rates affordable. But most customers are willing to pay a little bit more for innovation and things that make our systems more sustainable at the end of the day. So there is a cost, and customers will pay that cost, and it's up to us to pay attention to that.
Thank you. I would like to apologize to all the people who've sent in questions on the Q&A function that we simply can't get to in the time available. I tried to pick a few of them and we're just out of time. I would like to ask the panel if they have anything they think should be said they haven't said, please say it now.
I have one quick thought. As you look through the whole issue of distributed energy resources and the like, and you do the final analysis, a lot of it comes down to the matter of storage because of all of the different arrangements relative to the sun, solar, and wind arrangements and things like that. So ultimately, as everybody analyzes this, the question of storage comes down, and it's more than a matter of a couple of hours of that sort of thing. So I think the current craze surrounding hydrogen is going to become a very interesting part of what this is all about. Now, the problem, of course, is it costs way too much to be economically feasible. But we're observing work going on at NASA relative to some things going on down in Louisiana, which is one of the hydrogen hubs of the United States, where the capital costs are less than 10% for the generation of green hydrogen. So I think you're going to find Louisiana being a very interesting model to follow as far as what's actually going on. We're planning on doing this. It's a distributed arrangement where you actually generate the hydrogen where it's used, as opposed to waiting for pipelines to be built or ships to be built, or driving trucks through New York City with a target on the side of them and say, shoot me, shoot me. So I think this new distributed process that's coming together down in Louisiana is going to be very, very helpful for everybody in the whole distributed energy world.
Thank you very much indeed. Anybody else got anything to add? Rudy, please.
Llewellyn, I just want to make a point that my staff reminded me of. All of this transition and technology and innovation, the one limiting factor that I think we're all dealing with right now on some just bread and butter equipment is our ability to get the supply we need to actually, build it. So, whether it's solar farms or battery storage or whatever the case might be, I think the growth in these, in the development of these technologies will absolutely face some limitations from a supply chain standpoint, because I don't think our supply chain issues will go away for the next probably 2 to 3 years. And so I just mentioned supply chain as something to keep an eye on as we move down this road.
Anybody else got anything? Final question, final remarks?
Well, one quick thing, Llewellyn, I would just say that, hopefully we all understand that these resources we're talking about, distributed resources, are competitive resources that ultimately should be aggregated by competitive providers, I believe. And certainly the distribution utilities have a role to play in ensuring that the distribution system provides a gateway for these services to get value, both at the distribution level and the transmission level. But we need not to mix these things up, I hope. We need to keep them separate so that we can, in fact, realize the full potential of these distributed resources.
Thank you. Before I hand things, anybody got a last thing? No?
Just to say we can do it, Llewellyn. This is part of the solution of this transition we're all making.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to thank Jana Hobson and Kim Grover of USEA for their assistance. I couldn't do it without them. A recording and a transcript of the briefing will be available later today and will be displayed on the USEA website, which is usea.org. And I now hand it over to the USEA itself in the person of Sheila Hollis, the interim executive.
Thank you so much, Llewellyn, and thank you for organizing the entire program. I can't think of a place where you could learn more faster than you do in our news conferences. And I just want to thank our amazing panelists, extremely insightful and wonderful reporters. And we know your time is extremely precious, so I won't go on waxing philosophical about how all wonderful you are, but you are. And you're going to lead the industry into the future. And it's a complex, sometimes bumpy road, but we'll get there. And it does me good to listen and to share these ideas with you. I know your time is precious and how much it means for you to contribute it to us. So please realize that we thank you, our members thank you, and those who listen in thank you as well. And we hope that you will continue to work with us and Llewellyn. And if you have a chance, take a look at the USEA website. There's always something new and interesting on it, and you might find out what all we're doing around the world, which is entirely consistent with some of the observations made today.
Thank you all. Our show for today. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.